Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Well, it's been a little bit of time since our last piece of content was published, and obviously not about the ongoing war that is taking place between Iran, the United States, and Israel. Now, where are we at right now? So we are continuing to see this very large, very robust U.S. and Israeli air campaign that is continuing. It is continuing to degrade and it is continuing to hurt the Iranian armed forces and obviously the Iranian leadership as well. Now, is this operation by the United States going as planned? As planned. That is a important phrase. Is this operation going as planned? And the short answer, no, it is not. Now, what is happening that leads me to believe that all contingency plans were not being taken into account? Well, right now you see the deployment from the U.S. West Coast and Asia Pacific. You are seeing the deployment of 2 United States Marine Corps expeditionary units. Now, these are not large amounts of troops. It's half dozen or so amphibious warfare ships, 2 flat tops, 2 large amphibious warfare ships with the accompanying smaller amphibious warfare ships. The Boxer and the Tripoli are the 2 big, large amphibious warfare ships, and you'll oftentimes hear those ships carrying up to, quote-unquote, 2,000 Marines. Okay, so you'll hear the catchphrase, there are as many as 5,000 Marines heading towards Iran. Well, the reality is that 5,000 Marines may be 5,000 Marines, but the actual combat capacity in terms of maneuver units on those vessels is essentially 2 battalion combat groups. 2 reinforced infantry battalions right now are on their way to the Persian Gulf, or the CENTCOM area of operations. Now, if we go back to the start of this operation, none of these units were on their way to CENTCOM. So what I believe occurred was the Israelis and the United States received intel that obviously they were going to be able to strike a meeting and possibly decapitate the entire leadership capacity or much of the existing leadership capacity of Iran in one strike. Now, the problem with that is that in doing so, what was going to come next? Did the United States and Israel really believe that if we decapitated those leadership actors, that Iran would just then capitulate? And I believe that kind of going into the planning of that initial operation on that decapitation strike, there were some that actually believed that if that operation took place and if these key leaders were in fact taken out of the equation, so to speak, that in conjunction with a very robust 1 to 2 week bombing campaign that would lead to the capitulation of Iran. Now, obviously, that did not happen. That did not happen at all. And the problem right now that I see is that the war planners did not take into consideration the worst case scenarios of what would be next. What if Iran shuts down the Strait of Hormuz? What are our contingency plans in case that happens? So it would seem reasonable that if you were planning such a strike, you would want to place in the ability to conduct further operations in case Iran said, you know what, we're not going to capitulate. We're going to continue hostilities. And that's exactly what Iran is doing right now. Not only that, they're shutting down the Strait of Hormuz. Right? So if kind of going into this, if we knew we were going to strike and we knew we were going to take out these leaders, and we thought the possibility could exist that Iran would go ahead with their war goals and war aims of shutting down the Strait of Hormuz, what would be next, right? So essentially, from my point of view, it doesn't appear the United States planned adequately for the shutdown of the Strait of Hormuz. Otherwise, the U.S. would have moved both logistically and just from a force construct point of view. Those marine amphibious groups would have been moved prior to the kickoff of hostilities, or they would have been positioned in an area where they could rapidly be utilized in the Persian Gulf if needed. That didn't happen. That did not happen. Now, it could have been an issue where it was simply cost versus benefit. Israel, the United States said, hey, these leaders are meeting. This is our only shot to take out all these individuals in one strike. We have to do it. Now, the problem with that is when they did it, they were not fully prepared for the aftermath of what happened. And that is Iran is not obviously capitulating. Iran is continuing to shut down the Strait of Hormuz. Iran is launching missiles at a host of other nation states and key U.S. assets as well. And it's clear right now that at the start of the operation, even though these other forces were not moved to the region that would have helped the United States greatly, they felt that taking out these leaders was more important than adequately preparing for contingency plans. What if Iran doesn't capitulate? What if we find ourselves in a full-on shooting war with Iran launching ballistic missiles at a multitude of nation states and shutting down the Strait of Hormuz? What do we do then? And obviously we, as the United States, we were not prepared for that. Otherwise, again, those forces would have been moved. Now we're seeing those forces move now, and you're hearing the media, the mainstream media, talk about thousands of Marines being deployed to the Persian Gulf or CENTCOM area of operations for a possible ground campaign against Iran. So look, let's remove this from our thought process. There's not going to be a ground operation in which you would see U.S. forces move in from from Kuwait into Iran and then conduct an overland operation to Tehran, the capital of Iran. You are not going to see that. The United States is not going to occupy Iran. The force construct that would be needed for such an operation would in all probability be about 50% of the combat capacity of the U.S. Army would need to be moved from the continental United States and Europe and then positioned in Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, We'd probably have to force our way into southern Iraq and then conduct a ground operation into Iran, overcoming major logistical hurdles and then taking the capital city of Tehran. That is not going to happen. Right now, there is no plan on the table outside of Iran launching a major attack against the United States in terms of possible nuclear weapon or dirty bomb or something along those lines that kills tens of thousands of Americans. We could see that happen then, but we are not in the current conditions going to see a U.S. occupation of Iran. Now, there are ground operations that the U.S. could conduct that don't involve the full occupation of Iran or this overland march to Tehran, which would be incredibly difficult. It would be multiple U.S. heavy divisions would have to be deployed, trained, and then conduct a very arduous operation over hundreds of miles of very hostile terrain, fighting a fairly large enemy force. That's just not. And then the occupation. What next, right? That's not going to happen. But the U.S. does have the capacity to launch coastal operations. Now, the forces that are being moved into the region right now, these two, let's just call it what it is, two reinforced Marine amphibious infantry battalions that has a limited air assault capability and amphibious capability. That is what right now we know is moving to CENTCOM. Now, we haven't heard about any other large groupings of U.S. forces that have been put on alert and are getting ready to be transported to CENTCOM in terms of heavy divisions. Right? That is not yet happening. In all probability, we could see other units that could be and are probably preparing or being moved for possible coastal operations. Those units would be the Marine Raider Regiment. You would see the U.S. Airborne Division, the 82nd Airborne, possibly. You would see elements of other Marine units that could be moved or airlifted into the region. You could see, again, and these are not necessarily heavy forces, but forces in conjunction with lots of air power could take and control coastal territory. The forces that are being brought in, these two reinforced infantry battalions, and then whatever else is being brought in, be it 82nd Airborne, Ranger regiments, Marine Raiders, Navy SEALs, those units, even possibly other light infantry units from the U.S. Army could be moved into the CENTCOM area of operation, and again, used in coastal operations. The seizure of ports, the seizure of islands, that sort of operation. Not a full-on invasion of Iran, but a limited ground operation that could seize control of very important islands that are very important to the Iranians. I also would not rule out the possibility that the U.S. could eventually look to even seize Bandar Abbas. That would not be outside the realm of possibility. That is a capability the U.S. would have and the U.S. could execute. Again, yes, a ground operation, but would the seizure of Bandar Abbas and the port facilities near Bandar Abbas, would that then mean the U.S. is launching a ground operation to conquer Iran, change the government, occupy the capital? No, absolutely not. But it is something that would hurt the Iranian regime and it's within the capabilities of the U.S. military to launch that sort of operation with really limited losses. It would not be a overly difficult operation if the U.S. prepares for said operation. Okay? It's something that's obviously, I believe, is in the playbook, and I believe the U.S. could do it. Now, the problem, again, as I talked about before, the U.S. was not prepared for this. The U.S. was not prepared, obviously, for the shutdown of the Strait of Hormuz. Otherwise, again, the United States would have moved in additional assets before we initiated the kind of hostilities that we initiated against the Iranians. And again, I don't quite fully understand completely the logic behind what was done. Look, when you attack a nation state and you kill its leadership and you launch the type of air operation that was conducted in the first 24, 48 hours of epic fury, and whatever the Israelis are calling their side of it, and you do what the United States did, and you kill off that many leaders and generals and high-ranking officials, and you launch that kind of bombing campaign, I don't know how you cannot then say that there's a high likelihood that we're going to be in an extended conflict with this nation state, and we need to prepare for that eventuality, which would have been, in my logic, preparing better, bringing in more forces. But again, I believe that when the U.S. and Israel saw this developing in terms of being able to make this strike, I don't want to say it was a once-in-a-lifetime chance, but it was a very limited opportunity that Israel and the United States felt it was worth the risk. But unfortunately, what happened after and post-strike was not prepared for. Now, obviously, the U.S. are now moving forces and such into the region that will give the U.S. an enhanced capability to alleviate what the Iranians are doing right now in terms of the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. Yes, I think it's very possible that we could see some sort of limited ground operation. A limited ground operation does not mean you're then required to go all the way to Tehran. That is absolutely not necessary. We could also see the United States simply declare victory and end operations against the Iranians. Again, given the personality of President Trump, I could see that happening. I could see that occurring. I could see a very quick pivot opposite to what is ongoing right now. Because again, I don't believe the President of the United States fully understood what could happen post-decapitation strike, right? Did they really expect, or was he being told that once this operation takes place, the Iranian regime would be decapitated and we expect them to capitulate? I'm guessing that's what he was told. And maybe that's what he believed for some reason, even maybe without even being told that. And that's what happened. And that's where we're at right now. But you make your bed and you have to sleep in it. And now the bed is what it is. And the United States is going to have to do what it has to do. Either A, pivot and get out of this, or B, up the ante and make your adversary understand that he has been beaten. And sometimes that is tough. And what's going to happen next? Difficult to say. Again, it could go either way. This could escalate. We could see U.S. forces on the ground. We could see U.S. forces taking control of islands in the Persian Gulf. Again, I really don't, in terms of military resistance and the U.S. capability to do that and apply additional military pressure on Iran, I believe, again, the United States can do that without a great deal of casualties. A military occupation of Iran, again, not going to happen. We would see vastly more forces being moved into the region. Again, you would in all probably see major elements of the 18th Airborne Corps. You would see major elements of the 3rd Mobile Armored Corps, 3 Corps, 1st Cavalry Division, 1st Armored Division, other units that would be, again, multiple heavy divisions would be being positioned as we speak and would be heading towards Kuwait and possibly other areas. But we're not seeing that. Again, so what we're seeing right now tells me that they're preparing to alleviate the blockade of the Straits of Hormuz and possibly plan for operations that would involve the seizure of limited amounts of Iranian territory. Right now, that's where we're at. But the operation will continue. We'll continue to watch what is happening. And as always, thank you for joining us. Good day.